Welcome back to the Behavior Code. I'm Maria.
And I'm Gabriel. And okay, so I've been thinking about today's topic all week. Like, genuinely couldn't stop thinking about it.
Same. I keep bringing it up in random conversations, and people just get this look on their face like, oh, yeah, that.
Right? Like a mix of recognition and a little discomfort. Because the topic today is people show you who they are very early. Like, very early.
And we ignore it almost every single time.
We do. And that's kind of the whole thing we're unpacking today. Because it's not that the signs aren't there. It's that we talk ourselves out of them, or we just don't want to see them.
So let me just start with something that happened to a friend of mine. First date with this guy. First date, and he was rude to the server. Not overtly rude, just dismissive. Barely looked at her. And my friend noticed it, but she told herself he was probably just nervous.
And she probably filed it away under not a big deal, because everything else was great.
Everything else was great, charming, attentive to her, funny. She wanted it to work, and you can probably guess how it ended.
2 years later, the dismissiveness wasn't just with servers.
2 years later, it was with anyone he deemed less important than him, including, eventually, her. And the thing is, it wasn't hidden. It was right there. Date 1.
Right there. So the question is, why didn't she run? Why don't any of us run when we see these things?
That's the whole episode, and I think the answer is more psychological than most people realize. It's not about being naive or oblivious. There are real cognitive mechanisms at play.
Huge. Whether we're talking about romantic relationships, friendships, work situations, the early signals are almost always there.
All right, so today we're covering why we ignore the signs, the actual behavioral tells to watch for, how this plays out across different types of relationships, and then a practical framework at the end, something you can actually use.
I love that we're ending with something actionable, because this kind of conversation can feel a little doom and gloom otherwise. Like, oh great, everyone's secretly terrible and I missed it.
No, it's actually empowering once you know what to look for, and once you trust what you see.
Trusting what you see, that's going to be a theme today.
Big theme. Okay, let's get into it.
So, why do we ignore the signs? And I want to start here because the people who miss these signals aren't stupid. They're not weak. There are specific psychological mechanisms at play.
Huge. Whether we're talking about romantic relationships, friendships, work situations, the early signals are almost always there.
Ouch. Okay, the second one is wishful thinking, which is related to projection but slightly different. Wishful thinking is when you actually see the red flag, you register it consciously, and then you just decide it doesn't mean what it looks like it means.
You redecorate it. Like, yes, that's technically a red flag, but in this context, it's more of a pinkish flag. Maybe salmon.
Famine flag. Okay, but this is especially powerful in the context of loneliness.
Yes. When someone is genuinely lonely, their threshold for what they're willing to overlook goes way up, because the alternative is going back to being alone. So the cost-benefit analysis shifts. The red flag has to get a lot bigger before the brain will acknowledge it.
That's not a character flaw. It's just the math of emotional pain.
The math of emotional pain. And then there's the halo effect, which might be my favorite cognitive bias because it's so pervasive and so hard to catch in yourself. It's when one positive quality in a person spills over into how we evaluate all their other qualities.
So if someone is charismatic or attractive or successful, any one thing that we find really compelling, we unconsciously attribute all these other good qualities to them that we have zero actual evidence of.
And when that person does something that should be a red flag, the halo is doing work. It's softening the edges.
And the traction itself impairs judgment. There's research showing that when people are attracted to someone, they're literally less able to accurately read their intentions.
Which is kind of cruel, because the situation where you most need good judgment, choosing who to let into your life, is the situation where your judgment is most compromised.
It's like the deck is stacked against you seeing clearly. And I'd add novelty to this list too. When something is new, there's so much dopamine involved that everything exciting is amplified and everything concerning is minimized.
So by the time the neurochemistry normalizes, usually around 3 to 6 months in, you start seeing more clearly. But by then, you're invested. You've maybe introduced them to your family, you've built your life around them.
And unwinding that is painful. So even then, people push through.
Okay, so now that we know why we miss the signs, let's talk about what the signs actually look like.
Behavioral tells. And I want to frame this right. We're not talking about judging people for a bad day or a moment of stress. We're talking about patterns. And patterns tend to show up pretty quickly if you're paying attention.
The most reliable tell, and I come back to this one constantly, is how someone treats people who can do nothing for them.
Yes, this is the one.
Right? It's almost a cliche, but it's the single most reliable indicator of character. How do they treat the server, the janitor, the person at the front desk?
Because there's no strategic incentive to be kind in those interactions. So what you see is close to baseline, close to who they actually are.
And it's not just about being overtly rude. Sometimes it's subtler. It's about acknowledgement. Do they look the person in the eye? Do they say thank you? Do they treat it like a transaction with a vending machine or an interaction with a human being?
I had a mentor who would always pause our conversation to genuinely engage with anyone who served us in any capacity. He'd ask the barista's name, remember it next time. And I thought, that's just who he is. That's not performance. That's how he moves through the world.
And I'm guessing he was consistent in other ways too.
In every other way. The most consistently decent person I've ever known. And it started, literally, with how he treated the barista.
Love that. Okay, second tell, consistency between what someone says and what they do. And temporal consistency. Are they the same person on a Tuesday afternoon as they are on a Saturday night? Same in private as in public?
Oh, the public versus private behavior is huge. If someone is warm and generous in public but cold or critical in private, that's information.
It tells you something about what they actually think of you versus what they want others to think of them. The public version can be performance. The private version is usually closer to reality.
Third tell, how someone handles accountability. Do they take responsibility when they mess up, or do they deflect, minimize, blame?
This one can take a while to see because it requires something to go wrong. You don't see accountability until there's something to be accountable for.
But when you do see it, the person who says, that was on me, I should have done this differently, that person is safe. That person can grow. And the person who immediately looks for who else is responsible, that pattern will repeat in every conflict, every hard moment.
Every single time. Okay, the fourth tell, empathy. Specifically, the selective absence of it.
Selective absence. Say more.
There are people who can be moved by a sad movie, compassionate when a stranger suffers. But when it comes to the people closest to them, and especially when they are the cause of the suffering, the empathy disappears. They can feel for abstract pain, but not for pain they've caused.
Because acknowledging the pain you've caused requires sitting with your own role in someone else's suffering. And some people can't do that without it threatening their self-image.
And you see early signs of this in how someone talks about their exes, their estranged family members, former friends. Are there any two-sided stories, or is everyone else always the villain?
B, everyone else is the villain pattern. The common denominator in all those stories was them, and they've never considered that. Or they've considered it and rejected it.
Because accepting it would require a fundamental revision of their self-story. And for some people, that self-story is load-bearing.
Fifth tell, envy. This one is sneaky because it comes disguised as something else. How does someone react to your good news, your promotion, your exciting project, your new relationship?
A secure person will be genuinely happy for you. They'll ask questions. A person with unchecked envy will redirect the conversation to themselves or make a comment that slightly diminishes your win.
The congratulations with a but. Oh, that's amazing, although I'm sure it'll be a lot of pressure.
Yes, that but is doing a lot of work. And one or two of those moments might just be someone having a hard day. But if it's a pattern, good news consistently landing with a slight deflation, that's information about how they feel about your success.
And how they'll feel when your success surpasses theirs.
Sixth tell, how someone responds when you set a boundary, a reasonable, clearly communicated boundary. A healthy person will acknowledge it and respect it. Maybe they'll ask a clarifying question, but they'll work with it.
And an unhealthy person will negotiate, argue, make you feel guilty, try to convince you that you're being unreasonable, or just ignore it.
And if that happens early, really early in a relationship, it's a significant tell about how the dynamic will develop. Someone who respects you will respect your limits, even when they don't fully understand them.
Okay, so how they treat strangers, consistency, accountability, selective empathy, envy, and boundaries. These will all surface in the first few months if you're paying attention. You know what I think about a lot with the boundary piece? The testing behavior. Like some people, when they meet someone new, will almost unconsciously test where the limits are. They'll push a little, not aggressively, just subtly, to see what they can get away with.
Oh, absolutely. And a person who respects you will notice where the limit is and stay inside it. A person who doesn't will keep pushing to find a new limit, and then another and another.
And if you don't hold the first limit firmly, it signals that the limit is movable, and then they know they can keep testing.
It's like you're establishing the terms of the dynamic really early, and whatever you allow in those first few weeks and months kind of sets the precedent for everything that comes after.
Which is a lot of pressure, honestly, because you're still getting to know this person. You don't want to be rigid or cold, you want to give people room.
You do, and there's a balance. It's not about being inflexible, it's about noticing when your own comfort is being consistently overridden, and asking yourself, did I choose that or did it just happen? The question is whether you trust what you see.
Okay, let's zoom in on how this plays out in specific relationship types. Dating first.
Dating first. The most underrated early tell in dating is how fast things move, specifically love bombing.
Love bombing is such a loaded term, but it describes something really real.
It does. Someone very early in a relationship flooding you with attention, intensity, constant texting, calling you their soulmate after 3 weeks, grand gestures, wanting to spend every moment together.
And it feels incredible because we're wired to respond to being chosen, being seen, being adored.
Especially for someone who's been lonely or who has a history of feeling unseen, it feels like finally, someone who really gets me.
But love bombing isn't sustainable, and often, not always, but often, it's a pattern someone has developed around how to quickly secure attachment. And what comes after is an abrupt pullback.
The intense attention disappears or becomes conditional, and by then you're addicted to it. You're chasing the high of those first few weeks, and you're doing work to get back to something that was never stable to begin with.
So, how do you distinguish genuine enthusiasm from love bombing?
The distinction is, does the attention feel like it's about you specifically? Do they ask questions, actually listen, reference things you've told them? Or does it feel like they're projecting a fantasy onto you and you're the screen?
Love bombing is often about the idea of you. Real interest is about the actual you.
Exactly, and real interest can coexist with genuine enthusiasm. It's just grounded in who you actually are. Another big dating tell, how they handle disappointment. When a date gets rescheduled, when something doesn't go to plan, what happens?
If small inconveniences produce a big reaction, that's a tell, because you're going to encounter much larger frustrations down the road, and you've just seen the preview.
You've seen the preview. Okay, friendships. I think friendships are actually one of the places where early tells are easiest to see and most overlooked because we have different standards. We don't vet our friends the way we vet romantic partners.
And the early tell in friendships that I keep coming back to is what I think of as the balance question. Over time, not perfectly balanced at every moment, but over time, does the give and take feel roughly even?
Because there are friendships that are asymmetric from the very beginning. The person who never initiates, the person who always needs support but is mysteriously unavailable when you need it. And those asymmetries tend to calcify over time, not correct.
Pay attention. And then there's the painful one. How a friend behaves when you succeed or grow. You get a promotion, you lose weight, you publish something, you start a new relationship. And a friend who seems supportive becomes distant or subtly critical.
And you're blindsided. But if you look back honestly, the early signs were probably there. Maybe they made little comments. Maybe they were slightly uncomfortable with your wins, even when they were small.
Some people are friends with you partly because of a shared dynamic. You are both struggling, and there was safety in that. And when one of you starts to rise, the dynamic is threatened.
And the tell for this, early on, is whether your friend seems genuinely invested in your progress. Do they ask follow-up questions about your goals? Do they celebrate your small wins? Or are those topics somehow always redirected back to them?
Okay, work. And I think the number one early tell in workplace relationships, especially with managers, is how they handle failure, their own failure and other people.
A leader who can say, I made a call that didn't work out, here's what I learned, that's a safe person to work for. That's someone who gives you room to grow, to try things, to fail productively.
Versus the leader who goes looking for who to blame when something fails, defensive about their own decisions, punitive about other people's mistakes.
And you can see this early. Watch how they talk about past failures. In a team meeting, when something goes wrong, are they curious? What happened? What can we learn? Or are they in damage control, looking for someone to absorb the impact?
And with peers, how do they handle credit? Do they share it? Do they celebrate collectively? Or do they quietly maneuver to position themselves at the center of every success?
The credit stealer, very common and usually visible very early because they can't help it. It's an impulse. So in the first few projects, first few team meetings, you'll see it.
You will see it. Okay, I want to pause and ask our listeners something. Think about the most difficult relationship you've navigated, romantic, friendship, professional, and ask yourself honestly, were the early signs there? Did you see them and dismiss them, or did you genuinely miss them?
I think most people, when they really sit with that question, realize the signs were there.
They were there, and there's no judgment in that. We've explained why. But that recognition is valuable because it means he can do better going forward.
Okay, let's go deeper into the psychology because I find this stuff genuinely fascinating, and I think it explains not just why we miss the signs, but why certain people show the signs they do.
Attachment theory is foundational here. The short version, our earliest relationships, usually with our primary caregivers, establish a template for how we relate to people throughout our lives.
You've got secure attachment, people who had consistently responsive caregivers, who feel comfortable with intimacy and independence, who can communicate their needs and tolerate uncertainty.
And then the insecure styles, anxious, avoidant, disorganized, where things get more relevant to our topic.
Anxious attachment is characterized by a kind of hypervigilance about the relationship, an intense need for reassurance, fear of abandonment, difficulty tolerating any distance or ambiguity. And the early tell for this is often that intensity we talked about, the constant contact, the need to define things quickly.
And avoidant attachment is almost the opposite. These are people who learned early that expressing needs leads to disappointment or rejection, so they built a fortress of self-sufficiency. The early tell is a certain emotional distance. Even when everything else seems great, there's a pullback when you get emotionally close.
A subtle pullback, like a door that opens a certain amount and then gently closes.
And in the early stages, that can actually be attractive. It creates a chase dynamic. The slightly unavailable person becomes more desirable.
Which is partly why anxious and avoidant people so often end up together. The anxious person is chasing connection, the avoidant person is guarding distance, and neither is getting what they actually need, but the dynamic is oddly familiar to both of them.
Which brings us to trauma repetition. And I want to be careful here. This is not about pathologizing people. It's a very human thing. Our brains are wired to seek resolution for unresolved experiences.
If you grew up where love was conditional, where you had to earn affection, where things were unpredictable, as an adult, familiar feels like home, even when familiar is painful.
So, someone who grew up with an emotionally unavailable parent may repeatedly find themselves attracted to emotionally unavailable partners, not because they enjoy the pain, but because something in that dynamic feels recognizable.
And the early tell of a trauma repetition pattern is that it can look great at first. There's an almost magnetic pull. Your nervous system recognizes something familiar, and you call it chemistry.
Chemistry, which is real, but chemistry isn't always a good sign. Sometimes chemistry is just familiarity wearing a cologne.
I stand by that line. But here's the question to ask yourself. Is this familiar like home should feel, or familiar like home felt? Because for a lot of people, those are very different things.
Ooh, that's a profound distinction.
And then there's confirmation bias. Once we've decided that someone is a good person or that this relationship is going to be great, we filter incoming information through that belief. We weight the confirming evidence more heavily and explain away everything else.
Which is why the early impression matters so much, because once a positive first impression is formed, confirmation bias gets to work protecting it. You'd have to see something pretty egregious to overcome a strong positive impression that's been reinforced by this bias.
Which is why people stay in situations that everyone outside can clearly see aren't working. From the inside, confirmation bias is running the narrative.
And then, social masks. Most people have one, the version we present to the world in new or high-stakes situations. And it's not entirely conscious. It's partly learned performance and partly a genuine expression of who we want to be.
Normal to have some difference between public and private self, but the question is how different the mask is from the face underneath and how quickly it comes off.
Because the mask slips. Under stress, under disappointment, under alcohol, it starts to slide. And those glimpses are some of the most valuable information you'll ever get about a person.
Because in that moment, they're not managing their presentation. You're seeing something real, and the impulse is often to chalk it up to a bad moment.
Which sometimes is warranted. We all have bad moments. But if what you saw behind the mask isn't something you feel safe with, take note. It came off once. It will come off again.
It will come off again. I want to add one more psychological thing before we move on to the framework, which is the idea of integration, whether someone can hold complexity about themselves and others.
What do you mean by that?
So, a psychologically healthy person can hold the idea that I am mostly good and I also done harmful things. My friend is mostly wonderful and she also frustrated me yesterday. Both things are true at once. That's integration.
And someone who can't do that, someone who operates in all or nothing terms, tends to either idealize or devalue. People are either wonderful or terrible, depending on what's happening in the moment.
Right. And the early tell for this is how absolute is their language? Do they talk about people in extremes? She's the most amazing person I've ever met after 3 days. Or he's completely toxic about someone who disappointed them once.
The extremes. Because when you're the amazing person, it feels great until you're not anymore.
Until you do something that shifts you from wonderful to terrible in their internal filing system. And then all that warmth evaporates instantly.
Which is a really jarring thing to experience because it can feel so sudden. But it's actually very predictable once you know this pattern. Okay, let's get practical. I want to offer 4 contexts in which people most reliably reveal who they are, because high stakes or uncomfortable situations strip away the performance.
I love this. Give me the 4.
Stress, disappointment, power, inconvenient.
Perfect. Let's go through each.
Stress. How does this person behave when they're under pressure? Do they stay relatively grounded? Do they reach out for support in healthy ways? Or do they become volatile, controlling, checked out?
And stress will show up early in some form. Work deadline, traffic, a family thing. And the first time you see this person stressed, watch. That is your preview. That is what you'll see whenever things get hard.
And life guarantees that things will get hard.
Disappointment. How do they handle not getting what they want? When you cancel plans, when something doesn't go their way, when life doesn't cooperate.
And watch for the subtle guilt trip specifically, because it doesn't feel like manipulation. It feels like they're really hurt, and your instinct is to fix it. But fixing a perfectly normal thing is the beginning of a dynamic where their emotional state is always your responsibility.
Which becomes exhausting and unequal.
Power. How does this person behave when they have power over someone else? A title, money, social status in a group? Do they use it to listen, to give credit, to treat everyone with dignity? Or do they use it to assert dominance, to dismiss, to exclude?
And early on, there might not be a big power differential, so you look for the small versions. How do they talk to the intern? How do they treat someone who made a mistake? Those are data points.
And then inconvenience, my personal favorite, because it's so mundane and so revealing. The flight's delayed, the order's wrong, someone is walking slowly in front of them. How does this person respond?
Because inconvenience strips away patience very quickly. There's nothing at stake. There's no reason to perform. It's just, do you fundamentally expect the world to cooperate with you? And when it doesn't, what happens?
The person who responds to tiny inconveniences with disproportionate frustration or entitlement or rudeness, that is their operating system. It's not a bad day, it's how they're wired.
Having a momentary flash of frustration is completely human. I get annoyed when things don't work. Everyone does. The question is what you do with it. Do you take a breath and move on, or do you make it everyone else's problem?
And I'd add, watch how someone handles being wrong, even about something small. Do they course correct easily? Or do they dig in, get defensive, pivot to explaining why they were technically right even though they were wrong?
The dig in, which is called ego-protective rationalization in psychology. The ego won't accept being wrong because being wrong threatens the self-concept.
So, the framework. Observe how someone behaves under stress, disappointment, power, and inconvenience. And observe it more than once. One data point isn't a pattern. 2 or 3, that's a story.
And try to observe it across different contexts, because sometimes people manage beautifully under professional pressure but fall apart in personal situations, or vice versa. The full picture requires multiple angles.
And the final piece, and the most important, is to trust what you observe. Not the explanation they offer, not the narrative you've constructed, what you actually saw.
Trust what you saw. This is hard because we're so good at overriding our own observations with but and except and maybe they. And I think that's the real work, not just developing sharper observation, but developing the trust to believe it.
Observation without trust is useless.
Okay, we're heading into the close, and the thing I keep coming back to is believe the pattern, not the potential.
Say more.
We all have potential, and it's beautiful to believe in people's capacity to grow. But potential is not a plan, and it's not a promise. He could be so great if. She has so much potential, but we invest in the version of someone that doesn't yet exist. Meanwhile, we're living with the version that does.
And the version that does exist has shown us patterns, repeated behavior, consistent choices. Maya Angelou's line, and I'm going to say it because it's so perfect, when someone shows you who they are, believe them the first time.
Believe them the first time, not the 5th time, not after the 3rd apology.
And what we've tried to do today is give context for why it's hard to believe them the first time. The projection, the wishful thinking, the halo effect, the neurochemistry, all of it conspires against us.
And the compassionate framing is, we didn't miss the signs because we were foolish. We missed them because we're human, and because we wanted to believe.
That wanting, that hope, it's not a weakness. It's one of the most beautiful things about people.
It is. It just needs to be paired with clear eyes. Hope with clear eyes.
Hope with clear eyes. I love that.
So, before we close, if you're listening and there's someone in your life right now who has shown you something early, something that nagged at you a little, don't ignore it. You don't have to blow anything up. Just pay attention, keep watching, and trust that first feeling.
And be patient with yourself if the signs were there and you didn't act sooner. That's not failure. That's human.
Deeply human.
This has been such a good episode. I feel like we could do a whole other hour on this.
We really could. Part 2 is happening.
Definitely. Okay, thank you so much for being here with us. If this resonated, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you haven't left us a review yet, it genuinely helps us reach more people.
It really does. And we'll link some resources in the show notes: attachment theory, behavioral psychology, some great reading on all of this.
This has been The Behavior Code. I'm Gabriel.
And I'm Maria. We'll see you next time.
Take care of yourselves.